The pistol. The pistol on the table was a Colt 1911 government issue, the steel worn silver at the muzzle from the friction of a holster. It sat exactly in the center of the mahogany table, equidistant between the two men. It was the only thing in the room that wasn't lying. It is a humid Tuesday in August 1964. The air in the back room of the Italian restaurant in East Harlem is stagnant, heavy with the smell of garlic, stale cigar smoke, and fear. The man on the south side of the table is a capo from the Genovese family. His name doesn't matter, because in this moment he is just a vessel for violence. He is sweating. His collar is tight. He has 3 men standing behind him, their hands inside their jackets, their eyes darting around the room like trapped birds. They are the predators, supposedly. They are the ones who make the rules in New York City. But right now, they look like prey. The man on the north side of the table is alone. He is older. The hair at his temples is dusted with the gray of a winter frost. He is wearing a suit that cost more than the capo's car, but he wears it casually, as if it were a second skin. He isn't looking at the gun. He is looking at a spot on the tablecloth, a small stain of red wine that looks like a drop of blood. He hasn't spoken in 4 minutes. He hasn't blinked in 2. The capo leans forward. The wood of his chair creaks, a sound like a gunshot in the silence. He came here to deliver an ultimatum. He came here to say that the percentage was changing, that the split was now 60-40 in favor of downtown, that the days of partnership were over and the days of vassalage had begun. But he hasn't said a word. Because 5 minutes ago, just before he opened his mouth, the phone in the kitchen rang. The owner of the restaurant, a man who had paid protection to the Genovese family for 20 years, walked in. He didn't look at the capo. He looked at the black man sitting alone. He walked past the armed guards, past the Italian heavyweights, and he placed a cup of espresso from the lone man. He placed it gently, reverently. And then he turned to the capo and said, "We are closed." The capo looked at his soldiers. They looked back. They realized with a creeping cold dread that the walls of this room were not protecting them. They were closing in. They realized that if they touched the gun on the table, they would never leave this building. Not because they were outgunned, they had the firepower, but because the air itself had turned against them. The man on the north side of the table finally looks up. His eyes are dark, bottomless wells. He doesn't reach for the gun. He reaches for the espresso. He takes a sip. The clink of the cup returning to the saucer is the loudest sound in the world. "You brought a gun to a geography lesson," he whispers. "You think you're in New York. You're not. You're in my house. And in my house, the furniture doesn't talk back." If you're drawn to the untold power stories of Harlem and the men who ruled without noise, you're already in the right place. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The history books will tell you that the Mafia ran organized crime in America with an iron fist. They will tell you that they allowed black gangsters to operate only as long as it was convenient, that men like Bumpy Johnson were merely employees of the 5 families. They show you the organizational charts, the FBI surveillance logs, the grand jury testimonies where Italian names dominate every headline. They are lying to you. They are lying because the truth is too uncomfortable for the standard narrative of power. The files that were buried, the police reports that were shredded, and the oral histories whispered in barbershops from 110th to 155th Street reveal a completely different architecture of control. They revealed that while the Mafia had the judges and they had the politicians, Bumpy Johnson possessed a weapon they could not replicate, could not buy, and terrified them to their very core. There was a rule he operated by, a single immutable law of physics that he applied to the criminal underworld. The Italians called it omerta, the code of silence, but what Bumpy practiced was something far more aggressive. It was the weaponization of necessity. This story will change how you understand power, because true power isn't about being the one holding the gun. True power is being the one who controls whether the gun can even be fired. But to understand the rule, you have to understand the vulnerability that birthed it. Harlem in the late 1940s and 50s was an island under siege. It was a golden cage. The segregation was not just social, it was economic. The money that flowed into the neighborhood through the numbers game, the policy racket, was the only real capital the community had. The banks wouldn't lend, the city wouldn't invest. The numbers bankers were the Federal Reserve of Black New York. Bumpy Johnson saw this fragility. He saw that his people were walking on a tightrope over a canyon. If the Italians decided to cut the rope, if they decided to use their superior military force to simply take the banks, Harlem would fall. He knew he couldn't win a shooting war, not a long one. The Genovese and Lucchese families could field armies. They could bring in shooters from Chicago, from Sicily. Bumpy had a crew, a fierce one, but he didn't have an army. He spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that inevitable, crushing defeat. He felt the fear of a man standing at the gates of a city with a wooden shield, watching the Roman legions assemble on the horizon. He knew that if he fought them with violence, he would be a martyr, and martyrs are dead. Bumpy didn't want to be a legend. He wanted to be a king. So he stopped acting like a gangster. He started thinking like a union boss. He started thinking like a general who burns the bridges behind him so that the enemy cannot follow. He began to weave himself into the very fabric of the logistics. He didn't just take a cut of the gambling, he took over the distribution routes. He didn't just sell the heroin, he controlled the safe houses where it was cut. He didn't just pay off the police, he brokered the deals between the precinct captains and the community leaders. Slowly, quietly, without ever raising his voice, he made himself the bottleneck. The mob didn't notice at first. They saw Bumpy as a reliable partner. He was the professor, the smart one, the one who read Nietzsche and played chess. They respected him, yes, but they thought they owned him. They thought he was the manager of their branch office. They didn't see the invisible wires he was stringing up all over the city. It started with whispers. A shipment of narcotics coming in from the French Connection would arrive at the docks in Brooklyn. The Italians would load it into trucks. Everything was standard. But when those trucks tried to cross into Harlem, they would get lost. Drivers would be misdirected. Streets would be blocked by construction crews that didn't exist on any city map. Tires would go flat, all four at once. When the Italians tried to collect the numbers money, the runners would simply vanish, not killed, just gone. The shops would be closed. The grandmothers who took the bets would be sitting on their stoops knitting, claiming they hadn't seen a soul all day. The silence was deafening. The tension began to ratchet up in the late 50s. Vito Genovese, a man with eyes like a shark and a heart to match, decided he was tired of sharing. He wanted it all. He wanted the Harlem racket directly under his thumb. No more middleman, no more Bumpy. He sent his best enforcers uptown. They were men who had killed for Murder, Inc., men who didn't know the meaning of hesitation. They walked into the clubs on 125th Street, expecting people to cower. Instead, they found shadows. Every time they tried to pinpoint a location, it moved. Every time they tried to grab a lieutenant, the man was already gone. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. And then the accident started. An Italian soldier would walk into a tenement building to intimidate a tenant. He would never walk out. There would be no gunshot, no scream. He would just disappear. His body would never be found. No police report would be filed. It was as if the building itself had swallowed him. Genovese was furious. He screamed at his captains. He demanded blood. "Go up there and burn it down," he shouted. "Kill Johnson. Kill everyone who works for him." But his captains hesitated, because by now they had realized the horrifying truth. "Boss," one of them said, his voice trembling, "we can't find him." And the money stopped. This was the escalation, the moment the trap snapped shut. Bumpy hadn't just hidden himself, he had turned off the faucet. The millions of dollars that flowed from Harlem to the Mafia Commission, the money that paid for their lawyers, their bribes, their mistresses, had evaporated. Bumpy had issued a command: freeze. No bets were taken, no powder was moved. The economic engine of the underworld ground to a halt. The Mafia was losing tens of thousands of dollars a day. The lower-level soldiers weren't getting paid. Dissension was breeding in the ranks. The Italian families started fighting each other, blaming one another for the shortfall. Bumpy sat in his apartment, listening to opera, reading the newspaper. He watched the chaos from a distance. He knew that chaos was expensive. He knew that the only thing a mobster hates more than losing face is losing money. He delayed the meeting. He let them sweat. He let them bleed cash for a week, 2 weeks, a month. He waited until the desperation was palpable, until they weren't looking for a victory anymore, but just a return to normalcy. Then, and only then, did he agree to the sit-down. This brings us back to the gun on the table, the twist. The capo in that room, looking at the espresso, realizes something profound. He realizes that killing Bumpy Johnson right now would be suicide. Not because Bumpy has a sniper outside, though he might, but because Bumpy is the only man who knows how to turn the machine back on. Bumpy isn't the enemy. Bumpy is the key. If they kill him, the connections die with him. The trust of the neighborhood dies with him. The roots, the safe houses, the police contacts, it's all stored in Bumpy's head. He hasn't written it down. He hasn't culled a successor. He has made himself the infrastructure. The rule he used, the rule the Mafia feared, was the rule of integration. He didn't build a wall to keep them out. He built a labyrinth and invited them in. And then he made himself the only guide who knew the way out. The capo looks at the gun. He looks at Bumpy. Slowly, painfully, he takes his hand off his lap. He places it on the table, palm open, a gesture of surrender. "What do you want, Bumpy?" the capo asks, his voice dry. Bumpy finishes his espresso. He sets the cup down. He doesn't smile. "I don't want anything," Bumpy says softly. "I just want you to understand. You rent space in this city. I own the land." He stands up. He turns his back on the armed men, the ultimate display of dominance, and walks toward the kitchen. "The payments will resume tomorrow. Same split. Don't be late." He walks out into the Harlem night, leaving the most dangerous men in New York sitting in silence, staring at a cold cup of coffee. The event didn't make the papers. There were no bodies to count, But the story spread like wildfire through the underworld. It became a legend, the day the mob blinked. From that day on, the relationship changed. The Mafia stopped trying to conquer Harlem. They accepted the partnership. They treated Bumpy not as a subordinate, but as a foreign head of state, a visiting dignitary. When Bumpy went downtown, they stood up.